My session, as you would probably expect, is all about taking control of your inbox. For those of you who don't know me, just a little bit of background. These are some of my clients. Basically, I founded Mesmo Consultancy, and we specialise in helping people like you and your bosses and colleagues that you work with reduce email overload, use email etiquette effectively, and minimise the risk of cybercrime, all to help you be more efficient, improve performance and improve well-being. I'm author of Taking Control of Your Inbox and Brilliant Email, and I'm a visiting professor at Bournemouth University and City University. So let me ask you first and foremost, just think for a minute, what would you do with an extra hour a day? You might want to make some notes, because that's roughly what you're losing dealing with email badly. You are dealing with too much email that you don't need to deal with. Your email etiquette might be hampering you. You might be using email when another medium would be effective. And of course, last but not least, is cybercrime, which is very prevalent, very costly, very stressful. And email is often the back door to a cyber attack. Now, before we move on, just to suggest to you, the low-hanging fruit, the way which you are wasting a vast amount of time, is dealing with email that you really don't need. So you might want to just go and use our cost of email misuse calculator at www.mesmo.co.uk just to have a look. So what I'm going to show you and talk you through, I'm going to give you 20 top tips to help you manage your time at the inbox, manage people's expectation of when you will reply, have a look and make you feel comfortable using an alternative to email, how we can use some strategic aspects of email etiquette to reduce the number of email chains and rounds of email ping pong, and as I mentioned, lower the risk of cybercrime. And, you know, we all think we're invincible, and many of us are chained to our inbox. It's very hard to disconnect, so I'm going to give you some tips there. And as I said, these top 20 tips are really drawn from the Executive Secretary Guide to Taking Control of Your Inbox, which I wrote for Lucy Brazier and for the Executive Secretary about a year ago, and it was a delight to do so. So you arrive busy, you've got a busy inbox, you're trying to do an important task like book some airline tickets for the boss, prepare some minutes of the meeting, ping, another email arrives and you get distracted. Now, what do those distractions do to you? Well, they cost you at least 15 minutes every time a new email arrives. It doesn't matter whether it's the tiny little box that flashes up and says, I'm running 10 minutes late, to the email that you see that actually makes you stop what you're doing and change tasks. Distractions cost on average 15 minutes a day. So here is the first tip, the top tip, number 1. Turn off all those new email alerts. Now you're probably thinking, oh, but people expect an instant reply. Think again. Your behaviour and your attitude will influence others. They will very quickly get used to the idea that you will reply, but it might not be instantly. And think about it. If you reply, what are you setting my expectations as the recipient? An instant reply. So turn off all the new email alerts. Having done that, take time in between the tasks that you're doing or at the end of the task to deal with your email in batches. And what you want to do is deal with it in batches, as I said, and don't get tied to the inbox. So use something like the Pomodoro technique, where you set a specific time, or the 80-20 rule, where you triage the box and you deal with the 20% of the emails that will give you 80% of the return. And the key thing is to, of course, make sure that you have dealt with all the important emails before they become important and urgent. So tip 2, deal with in batches, either using the Pomodoro or the 80-20 rule. That works for most people. Now, it's very easy to just open all those emails, scatter through the box, pick out the ones you want to deal with, and then of course you've got to go back and do the whole thing again and keep opening them. So don't do that. Take a more measured approach. When you've picked out the emails based perhaps on subject or sender or date that you really must deal with, open each email and deal with it once and once only. So use, for example, the 4 Ds, which is deal with it, delete it, delegate, or defer. And if you defer, make sure you have a robust process for keeping track of when you need to deal with that email. Flags, something like that, drop them on the task list, on the calendar, or use categories. So tip 3, to summarize, handle each email once and once only. All right, that's how we deal with the emails here and now. But what about that continual volume of emails that's pouring in? Estimates show it's roughly 1 new email every 7 minutes. So what you need to do, the next thing you need to do over the next few days is audit your inbox and assign a priority to each email as you see it. High, medium and low works for most people. And then decide where you want those emails to go. So step 1, tip 4. Audit your email and mentally assign a priority to each email. Now, when you've done that, the question is, where do they go? So imagine for a minute that your inbox is like a highway. Do you want emails that are important? Maybe they are not high importance, but they're still important. Do you want them down the fast track straight into your inbox? Or do you actually want them in the slow lane? You can look at them at leisure when you're ready. So you can use rules to help you manage the incoming traffic. You use rules to move emails before you even see them, the second they arrive in your inbox, automatically to folders. So typical things would be out of office messages. It might be related to a project you're not dealing with now. It might be meeting invites that you want to deal with later. It might be newsletters. Tip 5, choose where and when each email arrives, in your inbox or in a folder. And before I move on for a second, for those of you with a lot of emails left over, one thing I would suggest is that you actually take out all those emails over, say, 3 weeks old and put them in a folder outside of the inbox so that you can start to move forward and see the new emails and use a little bit of what we're discussing now. Now that's your inbox. A lot of you I know will manage 1, 2, maybe 3 other inboxes. They may be your boss's inbox, there may be other directors, it could even be a generic sales at, HR at. So one of the key things to think about is who is overall responsible for the other inbox. Who's responsible for archiving, moving things to folders? How do you make sure that important emails aren't overlooked? For example, do you use categories? Do you use flags? Do you put them in folders? When was the last time we all think, when was the last time that you discussed this with the other people who use that mailbox? We think it's obvious because we've all grown up with email, but it's not as obvious as you think. If I tell you, I've been through how I manage my inbox probably half a dozen times over the years with my PA. So tip 6, agree with who is responsible for the different aspects. I've put the boss's inbox there, but it could be info at or all at HR. But who's responsible so that one person at the end of the day can look at that inbox and say, aha, we haven't answered that. And at the same time, 2 of you don't answer the same email, because that's just as bad. Now, if it's the boss's inbox as well, what you need to do is, again, just think about, you may want to discuss it again, maybe you discussed it a long time ago. How do you deal with the urgent and often sometimes confidential emails as well? Again, so, everybody likes things done differently. I know some PAs who have 4 different routines for dealing with 4 different directors' inboxes. But it really is important. Is it flags? Is it folders? I have one executive I know, he likes a text message because that's what he picks up quickly when there's something important. He doesn't want to go looking at the actual emails on his smartphone. Rather, he wants to be told there is only one that you must look at. So tip 7, I've said it really, it's obvious. Agree how you handle the boss's urgent emails or the urgent emails in the other boxes you look after. And if it's not working, go back, review and pick another way. Just sticking with, I'm going to stick with the boss's inbox, but as I said, this applies to any box where more than one of you is accessing that box. When you've looked at how much time you're wasting and you've audited your own box in terms of how much you receive and how much you really need, and taken some measures to reduce it, do the same for the other inbox. Because most people need about 50% maximum of what they're receiving. So you're receiving, say, 60 emails a day. 30 of those you don't want. So that's about 3/4 of an hour on one inbox you've wasted. And it's probably the same on the second one. So there's very easily an hour and a half that you're wasting. And especially if you're, again, you can use the cost of email misuse calculator. It's on the screen there as a reminder. And, one of the common areas I see of waste is, of course, if it's the boss or another director's inbox, you probably get duplicate emails. So again, you want to try and identify patterns and sources and then try and get those down. That may mean going back, talking to other PAs. It may mean that you ask the boss to say, when he has a team meeting, not to send the email to him and you, but only one of you. I know a lot of people who will copy the PA in because they think that's how they'll get to the boss. But at the end of the day, it's not, because the PA probably doesn't even pass them on, or she'll deal with them. So tip 8, reduce the rubbish, the unnecessary email in the boss's box. Now those first 8 tips might sound a little bit disproportionate, but they were all about how you manage the instant reply syndrome, because as I said earlier, your behaviour, your attitude will influence me, and it will stop me expecting an instant reply. If it's that urgent, I'll start to learn I need to pick up the phone or come and talk to you. But what about our email etiquette? Now, this is not about how you write an email, what grammar you use, because I'm guessing you're all probably even better at it than I am. But there are a few tips and hints I can pass on. How do you catch my attention in a polite way without being rude? Well, let me tell you what's rude. high priority markers, calling it urgent, and asking for a read receipt. That's guaranteed to put it at the bottom of the pile. So how do you do it? Well, the first one is the subject line. Tip 9. Catch my eye with the subject line. Make it clear. Crystallize that subject line. And if you need action from me, put it in there. That is not rude. That is just matter of fact saying, Monica, I do need your thoughts, your response by Friday afternoon. Again, just think for a minute, reality. You, the other person, the recipient, may well be picking their emails up on a smartphone. So you know how we all scan down, look at the subject matter, and a subject matter that is crystal clear will catch my eye much quicker than either an email with no subject matter or a subject matter that doesn't relate to the content. Now, what about the content? Well, email isn't about writing war and peace. So think in fives, high fives. 5 sentences, 5 bullet points, 5 paragraphs at most. You want your emails to be short, sharp, simple for the recipient to read and answer. And that's about thinking in fives. So tip 10, think fives for content. And if you go out to my website at some point, you will find that there is a video there specifically. It's about a 10-minute video dedicated to some top tips around thinking 5 and the 5 S's for constructing and structuring a good email. Now, what if it's 5 paragraphs long? Maybe you've got the 6th one in there. Again, we're all busy, we're all time poor. How many of you have looked at that long email, opened it, closed it, and then done that again, and there it sits? One of the questions I am most often asked is, why don't I get a response to my email? Is the other person just too busy? Dare I say, sometimes think they're above it. No, I hate to tell you, it's usually your fault as the sender. Going back for a minute, think fives, and if it is long, tip 11, put an executive summary in there. So you've now got the subject line grabs my attention, and as I just scroll down a fraction, there is a 1-line summary. This email is about the budget. Please can you amend, line, whatever. I will see that and I will deal with it. And then underneath it is the explanation of what needs doing. Okay, now you're wondering why we've got Beckham there. Why was Beckham in the news? Well, you can't really answer me back, but you can have a think about it. Beckham was in the news at the beginning of the year because he grumbled on in an email about why he didn't get a knighthood. So, you have control over only one thing when you hit send, and that is the person to whom you are sending the email. At the end of the day, you cannot control what they are doing with that email. So what happens is you grumble to somebody like Beckham did about something, and before you know it, they forward it, or if it's gone outside, as I think did happen in Beckham's case, their inbox has been hacked and your email is in there, and of course you, like Beckham, turn up on page 1 of the Daily Mail. So there are 2 aspects of any email software which in my book are highly underutilized. One of them I've touched on, and that's rules. And now we come to tip 11, or 12 rather. It is called the draft box. When in doubt, save the email in the draft folder. Go away, have a cup of coffee, sleep on it. But at the end of the day, don't put anything in an email that you can't defend in court, and you wouldn't say to somebody's face, and you don't wish to see on page 1 of either a national or a local newspaper, because it will happen. It happens often enough, and perhaps that's why I get called in lots of times. So we've talked a little bit about email etiquette there. There are some tips there. We could have spent the whole of this session on email etiquette, but I just want to give you 20 top tips to take away here. So let's just turn our attention to a minute for attachments. What is more annoying and makes you feel more stupid? It certainly does to me. It's when I send an email, I forget the attachment, and ping, another email comes back saying, I can't find the attachment. Tip 13, and I love this one. Attach first, then write the email. That way you will never forget to send the attachment. And just out of interest, because this has happened to me many a time, just make sure as well, if it's a big attachment, just make sure it's not outside the limits for sending emails in the daytime, and it's not outside the limits if you're sending it outside. Most companies, in order to keep their networks flowing and all of those good things, have a limit which is around about, it's usually about 20 megabytes, but it may be as low as 10 in some cases. So what happens then is you send an email with a big attachment and it just sits there till it goes in overnight. Now, I talked earlier as well about, is email always the best way? One of the problems with email is, of course, that it's very black and white. It's noir, as the expression would go these days. And you really can't see what the other person's thinking, how they've interpreted, and it's very focused. So, tip 14, and it's healthy. Make an effort to walk and talk around the office at least once a day. Perhaps batch up a few emails that it might be easier to deal with if you walked around and spoke to people. We all think we need an audit trail, but do we? Things which are not auditable in the sense, if you're not a lawyer, you're not an accountant, you're not going to have to turn up who made which decision when. Sometimes they're very simple things. And yet we revert to email. The number of times when I work with people, I see emails in their inboxes from colleagues who work 5 desks away. So tip 14, walk and talk at least once a day. And when you do so, tip 15 follows on. You know, it's always have a pen and paper and notebook handy so that when people tell you and ask you to do things, there is nothing more annoying when you ask somebody to do something and they say, oh, send me an email. How lazy is that? How professional to take ownership. Whether your notebook is, I mean, I just happen to adore conventional ones, and I'll tell you why in a minute, or it's an electronic one. Take ownership, write it down in your notebook. Now, I just love pen and paper because if you and I were talking now, I don't lose eye contact and I don't get distracted and I don't suddenly discover that my electronic device has run out of juice. But whatever it is, make sure you walk and talk, make notes, something you might observe, and at the same time when people ask you to do things, you've got your notebook there. I'm sure you've all got in your corporate programs well-being. It's in nearly everybody's, and mental health and mental and stress are issues which most organisations are tackling these days. Now, email is one of the top 10 stressors, actual email overload. But it's also a physical stressor, sitting there crunched up, scrunched up over your inbox. I bet most of us walk tall when we walk around, but how many of us have bad posture and sit there hunched up over our email? So tip 15 to improve your health and well-being. Check your posture. Make sure, like the photograph is showing you, that the screen is at eye level. Everything you might want is within easy reach of your hands. You don't have to stretch too much. And then as well, make sure you take regular breaks. You're probably wondering why there's an eye there. Our eyes are very precious, and one of the things which is most detrimental to them is, of course, the light of a screen. So make sure every 20 minutes or so you really do look away from that screen. Look in the distance. Ideally, I would also say make sure you have a sip of water, keep hydrated, and perhaps have a walk. There's a blog I just posted in the beginning of September, a guest blog with a few more ideas about how to reduce the stress and improve your well-being whilst at the same time staying on top of your inbox. And whilst we're still on the well-being topic, turn your keyboard upside down next time you're in the office and see how much food is in there that didn't quite make your mouth. I know I mentioned at the beginning, email is addictive for many people. We all feel we must have our quick shot of email. And we all stay connected late into the night, long after. The number of PAs and people I work with that say to me, they go home, put the children to bed, and then they start all over again. Well, tip 18, lean away at lunchtime. Make sure you have a proper lunch break when you're on leave and an hour before bedtime. Some of you think, well, I can't possibly switch off on leave. Well, if you can't, at least reduce checking your emails to once or twice a day, preferably at the end of the day, although some people say they like to check them at the beginning. I slightly question that because it can destroy the day for you. But again, if you're on different time zones and things, you work on that for yourself. And most importantly, try to set a time after which you just don't access your inbox, and make that your work inbox. Well, and it should really be your social inbox as well. And make that clear to people. Set boundaries, and people will start to respect that. And that boundary should be at least 1 hour before bedtime, because the blue light from our computers has been shown time and time again now to have a very negative effect on our sleep, and it's one of the causes of modern day insomnia. So as a good friend of mine would say, less email, more sleep, more sex. All right, now the last two are all about cybercrime, which is nowadays roughly 94% of all large businesses have suffered from some form of cyber attack. And email, as I mentioned, is the back door in two ways. One, these days, the cyber criminals are very, very clever. They'll hack and grab hold of just the chief executive's inbox, email account rather, and then send out emails purporting to be from him, which are very seductive. So tip 19, just don't be fooled by emails from the CEO or another senior executive. If it's unusual, stop. Don't touch it. Phone the IT department, because you might be the person who stops a major cyber attack. And similarly, there is another way in which you can leak information and you too can suffer. And that, of course, is the out-of-office message. It would not take a cyber criminal 5 minutes when he gets an out-of-office message from you to see where you live and burgle your home. And yes, it does happen. So tip 20. Limit what you say in your out-of-office message. Keep it really simple with one point of contact, one phone number, and if needs be, one email. But avoid saying I am on leave. Just say I'm out of the office. And that then, it confuses the cyber criminal, and he moves on to the next out of office message that says, aha, I'm on leave. I hope that you have found these 20 tips useful. You can find me here in all the usual places if you've got questions. Once you start to put some of this to use. I'm on all the usual social media. If you go to the website, you will actually see that there's a tab in there called videos, and we're producing over the next year. We've just started a series of very short videos which expand on some of these points. There's more on, for example, attachments, for example, the best way to use the different address boxes. You can sign up for our monthly e-briefing with tips and hints. And before you switch off, grab that pen and paper, and you should think about one thing you're going to do differently, and email me. info@mesmo.co.uk will reach me, and I'd love to hear. And for the best one thing that you are going to do differently, there is a free copy of the Executive Guide to Taking Control of Your Inbox. Good luck, and thank you for listening.